Okay, so it's 1 o'clock right on the dot. Great. Yeah, everyone keeps asking me if my favorite part of the conference is ringing the bell. Yes, it is. So I don't need to be a moderator. I can just walk around and ring the bell. But I'm very excited to moderate this session. So welcome back to our afternoon session, or welcome to our afternoon session. This panel is... yeah, really exciting. It's been a work in progress, or the topic that we will discuss has been a work in progress for a year and a half, I would say. The team working together on a white paper, and we'll get into discussing this. So the theme of this panel is data pollution and power. And what I would like to do is give the panelists the opportunity to introduce themselves in 1 to 2 sentences, and also, like we did this morning with our Gender and AI panel, to say something unique about yourself. Yeah, like a little anecdote or something surprising that we wouldn't know. So I'm Professor Aimee van Wynsberghe. I'm Director of the Institute for Science and Ethics, co-founder of the Bonn Sustainable AI Lab. I love jogging, yoga, and drinking Prosecco. And you need a microphone. Sorry, can you use that microphone?
Okay, so I have to come up with something now. Okay, I have to think while I'm presenting myself. So I'm Gry Hasselbalch, and I'm the research director of a think tank called Data Ethics. And at the same time, I'm also working for a foreign policy instrument, an EU foreign policy instrument initiative that supports the European Commission and the EU in general on outreach and diplomacy on what's referred to as the human-centric approach to AI, whatever that means. But that we can maybe talk about at another time. A unique thing about me, oh, wow, I don't know. I mean, my favorite food is sushi, and I originally studied Nordic philology, which people never know. So that's a unique thing.
There you go.
So
Wonderful.
moving from Nordic philology into AI is maybe interesting. Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Federica Lucivero, and I am a senior researcher in ethics and data at the InTouchAI Center and the Wellcome Center for Ethics and Humanities, which are part of the Big Data Institute, which is part of the NAFIL Department of Population Health at the University of Oxford. So I've something unique about me that comes to my mind. I don't know if it's unique about me, but people thought that was unique that when, like, back in the days I was finishing my PhD, I was spending my time at night before submission kind of kneading bread. And I gave like this kind of like very homely idea of me, but now I've definitely like not time for those things, but I still like to think about that time when I was kneading bread.
That's true, you made like 2 loaves of bread a night. Yeah.
Everyone was happy about that.
It's much more nervous to think about unique. What is unique about me? What is unique about me? My name is Şebnem Yardimci Geyikçi. I'm here working as a research associate at the Institute for Science and Ethics at the University of Bonn. Before joining the institute, I was associate professor of politics in Ankara Hacettepe University. And what is unique about me, I'm doing Pilates.
Pilates?
Yes.
Ooh.
And I played basketball when I was younger. I'm still young. I'm not going to say when I was young. So I think that's enough, yeah.
Okay, wonderful. You keep the mic. I'll direct the first question at you. So, yeah. Okay, so now getting into this idea of data pollution and power, you're also coming from different disciplines, different sectors in some respects. So when you are thinking about the concept of data pollution and power, how do you describe it? How do you define it? What are the boundaries, the limits, or what is at the core or the center of data pollution and power?
Actually, I'm rather latecomer to this topic, and like I was invited a bit later than the others. But as a political scientist, when I heard about data pollution, for me it was more about the contamination of information. So we already know from the democratic theory, for instance, one of the key to success of the democracies, the integrity of democracy is information. We need informed citizens for democracy to work, to process, to function well. And in that sense, like this contamination of information has a clear implication for the politics. So I will just give 2 examples, but you can also think of more. One is that like with the contamination of information, it is possible to manipulate public opinion. So we already know about these practices, and now like this certain informations can be disseminated strategically to influence public opinion in a certain ways. And furthermore, now like we have these social media algorithms, we have targeted advertising, and all these actually make it particularly different for the public to differentiate between the facts from fiction. So that is a huge problem for democracies, because in the end, we expect from these citizens to give informed decisions and to be able to take part, to participate in democracies. So that would be the first major implication on politics. The second one, which is also related to this first one, is that it exacerbates already existing polarization. So we know that like this dissemination of certain information is done, but besides that, we tend to like at the moments like with the social media tools, we tend to get information mostly from these resources. And when you have targeted advertising, when you have targeted information on certain groups, you tend to also create echo chambers. We call it filter bubbles. So all these also increase polarization because we are all locked in our own opinions. And this also make it harder for the people at large to hear about alternative views. So for me also, like coming from Turkey, I know that how polarization might have a detrimental impact on the politics. And also like misinformation also has significant implications on the ways in which politics can become much more polarized, much more problematic, and also at a certain moment, like it started to become also more authoritarian, because like people, they only know about their own views and they are not able to hear the other side, which also kills toleration. So that is what I got when you say data pollution. These are the major implications on politics, and also I would say further on the democracy and the future of democracy as well.
Veda.
Yeah. Oh, that's super interesting. And I just want to say that actually that's something that I found very interesting in the work that we did in the data pollution group, is really that we started with this very broad idea of what pollution is. And so you, as you said, you're talking about like the contamination of information and, coming from political perspective. I was coming from kind of more, physical idea, environmental idea what pollution is about, which like started from like some of the artists that Benedetta was describing yesterday, Timo Arnal, and like artists showing how like data centers and cables, like submarine cables, really play that kind of design, they have this very physical and material role. And it was something that really struck me. It was like back in 2017. I was just like, whoa, we are like in this discussion on big data and ethics, which, was part of my, kind of disciplinary and like intellectual and research interest. And I was like, how comes that there is not enough? There is like plenty of literature in science and technology studies and media studies and people talking about the materiality of internet. It's like, why we are not really dealing with this in the context of, the ethics of big data that was, my interest. And for me, so thinking about, to address your questions, like thinking about data pollution and power, for me, the main kind of power that I was thinking was kind of this, if you like epistemological, so it's about power, it's also about disruption. And what I wanted to do at the time when I came to this realization, really thinking and challenge why this topic was not part of the discussion of big data ethics. And trust me, saying it now seems like something like obvious that it should be, because the discussion has changed terribly in the, in good way, incredibly, in the last 6 years, thanks to a lot of people in this room. But at the beginning, it was a real challenge, I think, like also like convincing colleagues and that actually this is an issue, and that this is an ethical issue, and that addresses like issues of, issues of kind of responsibilities, that addresses issues around like social justice and invisibility of some, populations in thinking about, the impacts of like the material impacts of big data, and in thinking about kind of the values that we need to address when we think about kind of the innovation in the context of AI, in the context of big data, and when we think about, the other impacts, also environmental impact that they have. So that was the perspective I came into it, and like kind of challenging the discussion. And now, the question that I am into now is like, okay, how do we advance it? So as I feel that the ethics, community has responded, not to me, but to other people as clearly, but what I mean, as clearly seen this as a problem now. It's like, how do we advance the discussion further? And I'll stop it here.
Wonderful. So,
sense of time when I speak.
yeah, no, it's okay. So, Fede, you brought up the fact that we were working together as a group for the last year and a half. I also mentioned that when I was introducing. But maybe, Gry, you could also say more about this because you're the lead. You were leading this group. So, what is this group, Data Pollution and Power, and also weave that into what does it mean for you?
Oh, that's a big question. So the group, as you said, we came together for maybe 1.5 years ago, a group of interdisciplinary, cross-disciplinary scholars, and basically we gathered around the idea of addressing from we could call it the metaphor of data pollution, but it's not really a metaphor because it's also very concrete in many terms, around that term, trying to understand it from a kind of a reference point where we could find structures that would somehow connect the different areas of research together. And so we were working together with meetings, discussing from different angles, how can you address this topic from that point of view. So basically, I mean, from my perspective and from working with, the implications of big data, in the beginning working with data ethics and GDPR from that point of view, the discussion has really evolved, as you said, since, I would say probably since the last 2 decades, where we started with having the internet with data that was being collected and the concept of big data developing. And most of the conversation actually regarding data pollution in the beginning was actually as a metaphor. It was concerned with the privacy and the social implications of big data. It wasn't really thought of in that term. Then later on now, we've had starting to have this conversation about the actual polluting effects of big data. And somehow when you look at the debate, how it's evolved, this is the same, the policy fields have evolved somehow separately, even though they could be connected very well. So what we were trying to do in this group was to understand it from the point of view from, if we look at, for example, the Sustainable Development Goals, they are not separating these topics. But somehow when we got the AI conversations and the AI hype that we talked a lot about, the conversation regarding the impacts of this technology were isolated from all the other debates. And for example, the conversations that we've had about environmentally sound technologies, which was a concept that was developed already back in 1972, when some of the first conversations about sustainability were there, somehow got away from that debate. At the same time, the idea about having implications in terms of our privacy rights, mostly stemming from the debate we had in Europe, that got separated from the whole idea of having a holistic approach about how we develop technologies in a sustainable way. But now we're seeing at this moment that everything is coming together. And what we realized, I think, in the group was when we used the spectacle of power dynamics, it comes together in an even more coherent way. It was very clear from the beginning when we were having conversation that the power dynamics that were shaping data pollution, for example, in terms of the implications for our privacy, the implications for the environment in terms of carbon footprints of data infrastructures, for example, were basically the same one shaping all the different areas. So when you talk about, for example, pollution in terms of democracy, then the concentration of pollutants in information infrastructures is a challenge to democracy. And concentration of pollutants in the environment, like carbon footprints, is a challenge to democracy. So the power structures and the concentration of pollutants in the physical environment, in the natural environment, and in our democracies very often stems back to very particular concentrated forms of power, very particular stakeholders that are playing a role in both how we govern this environment and how the technologies are developed, the dependencies we have. We've talked about colonialism or coloniality, which was the term that Caesar used yesterday. And when you think about data pollution in terms of global opportunities, then the dependencies that are created by these big tech actors in developing nations are at the same time also a kind of power dynamic that we could call a form of data pollution. So I think this was the kind of the useful thing of using all of these different perspectives, but then coming together and actually understanding that the challenges are very similar. So maybe what we need is not to address things separately, but to find some holistic approach. And that we can maybe talk about a little later, because I think there is starting to be a momentum for bringing all of these different perspectives together. So.
Yeah. No, you go ahead. That's okay. Yeah, I've got my own. Thanks. Yeah, really, really interesting, Gry. And then also, I think what's important for the audience to know is that the final outcome of the group working together was the creation of a white paper. So we had spent this year working together, developing a concept and sort of framework for understanding the issue and the metaphor, if you will. And then a white paper was published, and we can provide the link to the white paper definitely before the end of the day. Then getting into some more specific issues, because Gry, of course, you were talking about, how to get all of these stakeholders involved, and this is, this massive topic. I wonder if we can narrow it in a little bit. So, Feda, I wonder if you can tell us, you work in a very specific application context, AI in healthcare, and I wonder if you can say something about this idea of data pollution and power when talking about the healthcare sector, the healthcare space.
Yeah. Yes, thanks. Yes, I think, so as I said, I work in a population health department where people are working with large data sets with a vision of improving health around the globe. And of course, within kind of population health, epidemiology, there is like a great understanding of the importance of the relationship between planetary health and human health, right? At the same time, I do find this is like again like in this quest of telling people, okay, hey, this is an important issue to tackle. What I find in the environment, kind of in a health-related environment, specifically in the context of big data health research and all health data science, what I find is that people will tell me like, okay, yes, really, these environmental issues are environmental, and I talk about kind of the environmental impacts of using like digital infrastructures for research and all these kind of very high computing technologies within that context. They tell me, well, yeah, okay, yeah, it is an important issue, but we are doing very important research. And then you don't, that's more important. And I always found, and this is kind of the answer that I got in many cases, which is I find problematic in many ways. First of all, because, like thinking about power, we all know that health and, it's, and digital health, it's a kind of a business in itself, and it's not just, of course, I work in a university where there is like, and I talk to a lot of like motivated researchers, like truly like trying to do their best to for kind of in terms of sustainability, in terms of, but at the same time we do know that there are a lot of kind of pressures, there are a lot of investments, and so and there are a lot of uncertainties about the kind of outcomes that this research will have. So there is a kind of an aspect of kind of the health and capitalism aspect. There is now who sets the agenda, for example, what is kind of a health issue that should be addressed. There is another aspect which is, we don't really know, we cannot give it as a given that research will bring to health outcomes, and health outcomes for whom. It's too easy to dismiss the issue by saying like we will produce something good. Well, when and how and to what extent, and if we need to measure, if it is about measuring, it's about assessing. Like how do we assess those impacts with respect to the environmental impacts? How do we look at them? And like all this kind of also kind of really epistemic questions about this topic. And there is a question like, so who should like, for example, like take responsibility in this context, and that's, so what I found is that actually while kind of the research practitioners, and I'm working with this together with Gabi Samuel, who was there, but she's done a lot of like interviews with researchers in biobanks, and she was really seeing like all these people having kind of this strong like individual thrive towards sustainability and doing better, at the same time saying like, listen, an accurate model has to be run a certain amount of times. And the more I train the model, the more I try, the better it is. And this is how science works, accuracy, robustness. So yes, sustainability is important for me individually, but that's not how the kind of the scientific structure works. This is not how I'm rewarded. This is not, and I think this is what, I kind of find interesting in this context, is really how, I'm not talking about kind of AI products and like in consumer focused, but they're talking about health, which is something like, like people do value. At the same time, there are all these issues, and we know that this issue needs to be tackled by everyone. So yes, even in the context of population health research. So what we find in health is like this. There are these kind of like strong dichotomy that is in the narration between health in some contexts, which is weird enough, between health and environment. So health impact versus environmental impact. That also brought us to talk a lot with people within the NHS, the National Health Service in England. That's what people were talking about, and people really like thinking about how the environmental aspects of digital transformation and so on. And these are the things they try to understand. It's like, okay, we can have some carbon accounting for this digital transformation and the use of AI in this context. But then how do we really measure? How do we need a measure, we need a way to quantify the outcome, the health outcome, the quality in terms of quality of life, in terms of like life saved, and the environmental impact. And only in this context we can make decisions. What we have been trying to do with Gabi is really to bring in more qualitative questions, like really broaden up the debate so that it doesn't become only a matter of, because then it really closes it down if we have to assess. It's very complicated to assess. Of course, we need to do that. We do need the carbon calculators and they're good, but we have been trying to like open up the question. So Gabi works at King's College, and we got this grant for a pump priming project where we are bringing together like all people like working in AI enabled health. And the idea is to build a network to actually try to develop an agenda in this context. And the way we are doing it is like also like working with case studies from Kenya and India, Australia, Canada, the UK. And and trying to basically like look at what are the issues like really on the ground, started from the practices of doing health research or doing like delivering healthcare. So this is actually something that if you're interested in, if you're working in this space, sorry, just like a small person.
Plug in my research.
We are just starting this. So if you're interested in being part of the network to collaborate in any ways, just let me know, because we are like making the list now. Sorry.
And the topic is bringing all of these stakeholders together to discuss the environmental pollution aspect in the healthcare space, or sort of still looking at opinions of healthcare practitioners?
No. It's really like setting up and coming up with an agenda, a research agenda. When I say research, it's about like academic research, but it's also like more action research, but really trying to understand what are the relevant questions and what are kind of the methods that we have when thinking about AI-enabled health and the sustainability of AI-enabled health.
Yeah, sounds good. So, Şebnem, I wonder for the next question, if you can say something about, you brought up examples, so you're looking from the political sciences aspect, what is the impact on democracy? What is the impact of the relationship between citizen and state? And we can see that it's big tech that is creating these products that you're concerned with, if I understood your opening statements correctly. And then who would you say is responsible then for fixing the situation? You warned us of what is happening right now and what is to come. Would you then say, okay, it's up to big tech to fix this, or it's up to policymakers to fix this? From a political science perspective, then what tools would you suggest we're supposed to use?
This is a very difficult question to respond, but like we know that for us, obviously there is this fact here, like with increasing use of AI and increasing like AI use in our lives, and like I think even in the last year we experienced a significant, let's say, acceleration of this process. So I think first of all we need to understand that this will have important implications over state and society relationship. So and like for me, like the solutions are mostly come from top. So the solution seems to be mostly at the level of either the big techs or either the international organizations. European Union is a key actor in the process. But I think it's also important, we need to think about what might be the bottom-up processes, like such as at the level of local communities, for instance, or like we can think of how we can include more people in the process of understanding and also like like making sense of artificial intelligence impact on our lives, because like sometimes I think when we go back to the original text, we see that like this is maybe the artificial intelligence is the final or one of the last part of technological development. So whenever we have such huge revolution in technology, it had implications on the politics as well. So for instance, we owe political parties, we owe parliaments to the Industrial Revolution. And now like we have these old institutions with a very new technological development, and this doesn't seem to go together. And like now, like this AI actually finds what is not working in that. So it's like it creates, how to say it, the errors. It finds the errors in the system very easily, and it can manipulate. It can actually disturb the integrity of this system. So this is why I think there is also the role of society in this, like, and we can increase inclusion mechanisms. There are now, we know, for instance, new tools using the new democratic innovations such as mini publics. We know there are other democratic innovations that tries to increase the involvement of the people at large in these processes. But besides that, once again, I also think that this requires the involvement of local communities in these processes. And by involvement of local communities, it's not only about their own specific comments, but it's also about like the increasing education, creating certain types of organizations that can only, let's say, respond, let these people know about how these processes emerge. Obviously, there was already a gap between North and South. We already talked about it. But now, like I think there emerged new types of gap between who has access to these developments, who are able to control, understand, and to be part of it, and those who has no idea of what's going on. And data colonialism is a clear example of that. So in that sense, like there should be ways that we need to create to include these vulnerable communities more in the process.
Okay. Gry, I wonder if we can turn to you again. I wonder if you can do two things. The first one is, you had mentioned that there was the 7 different dimensions that came up in the white paper. If you could maybe list those for the audience so that they get more of an idea of how we were trying to synthesize ideas. And then also, so I've asked Federica about AI in healthcare. I've asked Şebnem about, AI in the political space and who's responsible for making fixes. And you're very much in the policy-making space. And so then can you reflect on either the shift in the understanding of this concept of data pollution and power, or the reception of this concept, or the momentum? You can choose which one you want to do. But the two things, the 7 requirements, and then from the policy space.
Small, complex
in
question.
2 minutes or less. No,
oh wow! But I love complex questions, and I also like complex answers. And I like, because I think we're really in a moment now where things are much more complex than what, those in the big tech powers that we're talking about are actually presenting as the easy solutions to all the problems we have. So let's be a little bit complex about that. So to start with, actually to give a little bit of an overview, and I also, thank you for mentioning that we published a white paper also. It's good to have you next to me, because I think some of the key kind of areas that we discussed during our meetings was these 7 areas. And I'm just going to list them now because it gives a good overview of how different and how disparate all of these areas are and how connected they actually are. So the first area, or in general, we're talking about nature, science and innovation, democracy, human rights, infrastructure, decision-making, global opportunities, and time. So let me give you a little bit of an outline of what each area contains. So nature, of course, you can imagine the data pollution, we looked at it as a carbon footprint. So we looked at it as something that could be addressed in the design phase of AI as like a component of the competences on the practices and the education and kind of the dependencies that people that are developing technologies have. And of course, one of the things that we saw here was that it's incredibly complex, as you just said, to measure and to even design mitigation strategies for understanding the carbon footprint of these technologies. So there's so many levels of data pollution here. In terms of science and innovation, we looked at, we saw data pollution in very concrete terms as a kind of pollution of the culture of the big data and science and innovation. Also the style, the technological styles of the people that are developing these and developers in general. So generally, the kind of Benedetta yesterday talked about the imagination and looking for an alternative imagination. So we could talk about a little bit about a polluted imagination in some way, where we think the big data mindset that also has been talked about before is this idea that big data is an unlimited resource. So we have as much as possible, and we can use and we should use as much as possible. So this is the science and innovation, kind of the cultural aspect. In terms of democracy, I'm not going to say much. Şebnem mentioned this, but what if we look at data pollution, then we can look at, again, democracies based on very sensitive balances of information sharing between different powerful actors and unpowerful actors, and disempowered and empowered actors. And if we look at them as ecosystems of information, then data pollution in democracy is an imbalance in this system. Human rights. The human rights system, I think, is something that we need to mention all the time, because it's something that has been developed, institutionalized as very clear rules and very good, like really developed ways of testing and understanding when there's an interference to a human right, for example. And data pollution in this way, you can think of it as a corrosion of the international human rights system, because with this big data development, we've seen a lot of balancing suddenly with some rights that are considered unimportant suddenly, even though they're fundamental rights. We see them as universal. So we have something like privacy that is suddenly being challenged, and we had to have, for example, the UN General Assembly that had to at some point reaffirm that the same rights we have offline also counts online. So that's a kind of a corrosion of a system that we already established and which is part of our legal system. Infrastructures. Data pollution is, again, I said before, it's a concentration of power in what we could talk about as socio-technical infrastructures. So of course we have the technical part, but we also have the social part of this. All of this is outlined in the white paper as well. Decision making. This is going to be more than 2 minutes. So, so when we talk about data pollution, then very often when designers and developers are talking about data pollution, they think about bias or at least sieving out bias, which basically I think any AI system does have a bias. But so you connect it with the idea of a type of bias that can result in discrimination. So we have, of course, all these autonomous decision-making systems, and if we think of data pollution as something that reinforces, for example, biases in systems in healthcare or in the judicial system or anything, then data pollution is basically something that reproduces or has discriminatory effects in society. Global opportunities. Then we can say that data pollution is colonialism, but actually I like the term coloniality. And that is, again, we have this idea that I said before, if you have create increasing dependencies around the world where you have a concentration of powers and you have some nations that are usually always at the losing end of this kind of development technologies, because if you think about AI technologies and where are they being developed and how they're being used, you know, all the opportunities, they end in the Western context, and they're extracted from other places. And also the very experience of some of the kind of the polluting effects. And I think not only we heard about carbon footprints and the e-waste yesterday that is like dumps, e-waste dumps in the developing nations. Well, that it ends up again on the side of the ones that are already not in power. So global opportunities are always are also being concentrated further by data pollution in the hands of the powerful. Then time, that's something that is interesting, because we can think of data pollution as a kind of disempowering rationalization of time. So in the sense that if you have a system that will where you will, you know, you need to mainstream or you need to categorize, you will always have like a dynamic dimension of the qualitative time of humans or minority groups or something that doesn't fit into the system. And this way we can think of the rationalization of time as something that affects also and is a form of data pollution. Now, regarding I tried to speak fast. So regarding how the development of the policy debate has been going on, as you said, I'm very involved in all of this, and I have been involved in it since probably like the last 2 decades, going from when there was the development of the GDPR, even before that, when we started talking about, you know, how does online media, you know, what role does it play in our lives, and going through into the decade now where we suddenly have conversations about trustworthy AI and ethical use of data and data protection and all of these things as even, and that's a big development, as a competitive advantage of regions, the EU, or companies. So the ones that marks themselves in a what's considered an ethical or something that adheres to values, human values, fundamental rights, human rights, is considered something that is a good investment, both not only for the good sake of the planet and people, but actually it's an economic investment. Because if you don't invest in it, then at some point if you're a company, you will probably suffer greatly from either a hack or something like that. And so of course the entire policy debate has moved along like that. I mentioned before that there is kind of separated, isolated policy spheres. So we have the Sustainable Development Goals on a global level. At the same time, we've had, and this is mostly springing out of Europe, this new kind of, since the General Data Protection Regulation, where the EU really took a strong stand to create data protection rules in what was considered a technological environment, a data environment that was somehow running out of control, to more focused on general digital strategies and strategies regarding creating positive and creating protection of rights and creating this digital sovereignty of Europe. So we have had these two spheres moving in basically isolated, which is a strange way. So when you look at, for example, something like the AI Act and the high-level group, many of you know that we had 7 requirements, and most of you probably, I think it's been repeated a few times, that the one on social and environmental well-being was not included in the first proposal of the AI Act. But you might also know, and as we also heard yesterday, this has now been reintroduced into the AI Act by the Parliament. And this is a fact that you see around in all the different policy instruments, that it's slowly been included in all kinds of legislative proposals, strategies on AI, the digital environment and everything, where fundamentally, originally, we were looking at these spheres as 2 different things. So when we talk about a holistic approach like we did, we're also seeing that being repeated and being connected within the policy environment. And that's, I mean, I see that as a positive thing. Of course, we haven't come all the way, because then how do you, if you have to do a conformity assessment as an AI developer, how do you actually assess the social and environmental well-being of your system? So that's another thing.
But that's real innovation, though, right? When you have to find ways of conforming requirements. Okay, so thank you, all 3 of you. I'd like to, at this moment, open it up to the audience, open the panel up to the audience. So happy to take questions from the people who are physically here. And also for those of you who are joining us online, please, if you want to ask a question, use the Q&A function that you can find. So for people in the audience, who would like to ask the first question? Oops, I opened the chat function, but I shouldn't have done that. Yes, Benedetta. We need the microphone for the people joining us online. Yeah, sorry about that.
So it's active. Okay, sorry. I was curious to see your opinion and to have your opinion on this idea of, we can call it a pollution tax on big tech, or we can call it a carbon tax on big tech. And if you thought that it's an idea that could be considered and maybe then applied through an instrument of global governance, for example. And because the way I see it, it's a great way to collect the kind of resources that then we will need to address major issues around data pollution, for example. But of course, the terms under which this collection of resources can be administered, can take a variety of ways. So for example, it could be left to the same digital lords. It could be, given at the local level or administered by, local municipalities. So I'm just curious to see if you consider this an option, and how do you see this developing? Thank you.
Yeah, great question. Who would like to start? Do you have a microphone?
I was talking, so now I'll let someone else.
No, I just want to say something about that, because something that I was actually thinking while you mentioned that in your talk, Benedetta, and of course, I always come up with a critical question. So I'll come up with a question about that and with a kind of a worry that I would have in that context. And it's like how, when you want to put like a pollution or a carbon tax, then the question is, how do you measure things? What are the tools that are used to measure, like carbon emissions? What are the tools that are used, for example, to measure kind of setting and so on? Because what we know is that, of course, these tools are very it's not just how they are administered. It's also like how they are built. What are the assumptions that are used? And so, like being really, really careful that doesn't become another kind of empty tool that makes people feel like, oh, we have addressed the problem, but then it doesn't. It doesn't really because like the calculations maybe are kind of narrow, or because that it's left, as you said, like it's left like up to then the actors to decide, okay, what they mean by offsetting, or it creates another market for certifications and like companies providing certifications that again, there must be some form of accountability for that, and that accountability, I would say, has to keep that level of, it has to be done at a higher level, but also has to account for kind of the micro level of the practice and the context, and the type of companies that they are trying to address.
So the short version of the answer is you think yes to a tax or no to a tax?
I think it,
or
just
fine,
talking about,
or...
no, sorry, but it's like, it would be like, it depends. It's just like the tax itself is not a solution if we don't think about what are the criteria that make this tax applicable and kind of what are the assumptions.
But the starting point would be, in this case, and I totally take your point on the certification, and we had a conversation about that, and I know that it's a market mechanism and so on. But the starting point for me would be, digital lords are having a huge impact in terms of polluting. We demonstrated it, we know it, it's, we need to, of course, the measurement could be complicated, but if we stop measuring and we just start from the assumption that they are polluting and they have a huge impact on the environment, and so they're agent of pollution. If we start with this assumption, then we could consider that 1% of the revenues would go into a carbon fund, right? To address the kind of environmental pollution that they are achieving, right? At that point, once we have this new fund, which is huge if we think in terms of the revenues, right, of these global digital lords. So at that point, what would be a good way maybe to use these resources, So that's the second step, if you will. So maybe Gry can also.
But yeah, I'm just sitting and thinking here, because taxing is also somehow accepting something, no? So I also think we come to a point where, and that's probably the strength of looking at this term data pollution as something that goes across different areas. Because if you kind of try to, if we really tackle some of the biggest problems that we had from the beginning in terms of surveillance and privacy implications, we would actually go towards alternative technologies that were using less data, data minimization is one of the key points. So regulating in those areas, I would say, taxing is saying, okay, it's okay, you do that, you just have to pay something back. While regulating is actually saying, this is not, and I think you said it yourself yesterday, we come to a point where we're saying, no, this is not okay anymore. So even, whatever you're doing has to be done in a different way. And I think actually the only way is, there's different policy ways, but one of the important tools that we come with now is, first of all, implementing the law. So one of the first things we can do is implementing the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, because if we take, as I said, the starting point when we started talking about data pollution, privacy, and we start regulating that for real, we actually have a solution for the other thing, because you wouldn't be able to create these huge amounts of, at least with personal data, which is probably some of the most processed data in the world, or at the moment. There's many other kinds of processing of data, but that's one of them, no? So it's more, I'm thinking the narrative around taxing is more accepting what is, and it shouldn't be. So maybe that's it.
Yeah, I think you both have a point there, because it's almost like similar to carbon credits also as well, saying maybe it doesn't become an incentive for them to pollute less.
Yeah, I would like to add something as well. I like the idea that like there is already too much know-how and experience that we had with the climate pollution, so with the climate crisis and so on. This is part of this. But on the other hand, like as you said yesterday in your talk, it's we are in such an urgent moment that maybe like it's time to think about more radical solutions rather than like this already used solutions, but that did not work in the end. So this is like how we come here by using all those previously tried solutions. So in that sense, like by radical, what I mean, for instance, there are now theories of degrowth. You know,
What? Sorry, can you say that again?
degrowth.
Oh, degrowth.
And so maybe, I mean, it's time for us to be more radical because we are about to lose the earth at all. So like this is why maybe rather than this, I would say more embedded solutions, maybe we can think of more radical approaches at the moment.
So if I can play devil's advocate and jump on board with Benedetta and say, let's go for a tax or a fine or something like that, I hear the idea of why we should have a radical solution because we've gotten ourselves into such a ridiculous predicament. But then many of the things that we've talked about in the last day and a half require money to build infrastructure or for solutions, right? If we're talking about the terrible mining conditions in the global south, and or this morning I was listening to a talk on ghost workers by Sergio, and the slave-like conditions that the ghost workers labeling the data or the images are in. And so we need to pay appropriate wages. We need to clean up the environment in the global south to help mitigate some of the impact that we've had. This fund that could be created could be a start to also a radical idea of the toxins or the pollutants that we create in the global north. We now have to do something to fix what we've done and to help the global south. That could also be a radical idea, picking up on the fine.
No, go.
I was
Just to play
just saying
devil's
that,
advocate.
yes, that could be a start, and also like in the end we need to start from somewhere.
Yeah.
But I think I still think that like we should also ask the questions: who is going to collect that fund? Who is going
Benedetta.
to distribute it? So like there are already existing huge power disparities. So before responding to those power disparities, I'm not really sure whether these methods can work. But I agree, it's still like it makes sense to start from somewhere.
Yeah, I just really, there's a question there, but I just very quickly, what I wanted to say is that it is, what I find it's radical. It's really the idea of the fund more than the idea of the tax. And what is radical about that is the idea that the state and kind of the idea of kind of regulating the big tech and like saying like, okay, now you have to account for this. So the problem is, as I said, like how do you implement, how do you avoid the other issues with carbon taxes and so on? And I think it's an important aspect is like, it's not just digital tech, like large digital tech, there are also like the small ones. And then how do you make sure that it is fair? So I think it's just a matter of I'm not saying like it just doesn't work at all, although I mean I take Gry's point, but at the same time it's also a matter of we also know that we are using these technologies and they're making all this possible and we're not going to get rid of it. So the question is also how do we live with that, and it's fine, it's also about mitigation, it's not just about radical change, but then there is like the discussion about what this tax is about and what the fund is about, that has to be radical. That's
I agree.
like
yeah, absolutely. That's why also the way in which we might conceive it is so important, and who actually administers these funds and the kind of also the governance behind it.
Can say something really quickly because it really connects with what we've had what we talked about throughout the conference. Again, if we talk about a tax and a fund for this, it feels like we're repairing something that's already broken, no? And so what we're dealing with is we have a concentration of power. We need to decentralize that power, and one way is really to kind of try to invest in some of the communities in the developing nations, for example, to give them the power to develop their own AI technologies, for example. So create some competition and some challenge of that power. I think that's a much more sustainable structure. Even though I can see for a quick fix and repair, then there's not only one solution. Of course, that could be part of the solution. But part of the broader picture would certainly be that not only doing it for the good and, oh, we want to be nice with... No, because it's actually sustainable to have a competitive global culture, no? So...
Oh, microphone's coming.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think I agree with you with trying to what the fund will be used for, and also to support the global south to also have that competitive voice. Now, the whole idea of data pollution, I want to ask, how did we come to data pollution?
You mean the term or the situation?
No, the situation we find ourselves. And I could think of perhaps data collection, how it started, and maybe data sharing could contribute to data pollution. So if we could get solution to do data collection and data sharing, then perhaps the pollution too can be mitigated. Now, about the, how do you call it, the governance issue and taxation, it just draws me back to the issue of climate change, where we are fighting over the demand side policy and the supply side policy and the green paradox. I think very soon there will be another paradox in data pollution as well. It's not working. That taxation method is not working. That's why I say I can agree with you. Now, to tax means that we accept the situation, do more, and of course, I will pay, and I'll pollute them more. So the taxation for me is not working. If I look at the climate change situation, the taxation is not the best solution.
Just a comment or a question?
The first one, we deal with it.
Yeah.
I felt, let's
How
talk
did we
about, how did we come to this
How
point?
did we get into this situation of data
Well,
pollution?
I can build on what you said. So the how did we get into the situation? Big data. So that's basically the mindset, the entire development of that socio-technical infrastructure built on this idea of, again, as I said before, the data as the unlimited resource that basically you can extract it and use it without understanding the very material effect or the very social or environmental effects in general. So that's how we got to there. So and I really like, again, referring to Benedetta yesterday. So what we need, of course, is to a different imagination about how to create something like this.
Yeah, just when you were speaking, it's like, how did you get there? It's like, oh, it's a lot of complex. And then the first thing the first image that came to my mind was that issue of the economists saying data is the new oil. And so data is the new oil, and meaning really at the time it was thought like in terms of investment. And for me it was like, no, it's that really the new oil in terms of pollution and in terms of power and so on. So, and in terms of, as I said, in terms of investments. And I think the connection there, more than anything, is with like Zuboff's work, like the whole idea of digital capitalism, surveillance capitalism. And because that is kind of the business model that actually makes like we want more and more and more and more data, and like makes it kind of a profitable source. So I would say, yeah, for me that's kind of the first image that comes to a very complex question that, of course, blah blah blah. But it is, I think that's really key there.
So I'm conscious of the time. We're just about out of time. Before we close the panel, I wonder, I did this in this morning's panel where I asked each of the panelists if they had a magic wand and they could wave it once. Not the AI wand or the AI myth, but if you had such a magic wand in the context of everything that we've discussed today in terms of data pollution and power, what would be the thing that you fix, or what would you use your wand to do? Obviously not a tax, but what would you use your wand for? If we're talking about our imaginations, this has come up. Benedetta has provoked, inspired something in all of us now. Use your imagination.
I think that the magic wand would go towards the concentration of power. So I would do like this, and the power would be dispersed. So if that's and that's a very complex.
Or dismantling big tech companies.
Exactly,
breaking them apart.
Yeah, exactly.
Love it.
Well, since the wand is magic, and so I can say anything. It's basically, it's having people, pushing people to really, when we talk about it's about changing culture, and it's like whatever. Yes, how do you do that? But if I had a magic wand, it's like really like pushing people and pushing like all these different actors to think about what's degrowth or different models of growth mean, and really like think about like different ways we can, we can address all these questions. So yeah, it is a matter of really engaging with the question from like below and imagining and thinking about new futures. And if I can just say something, there are extremely like interesting experiments done with kids. Kids are extremely good at this kind of as we all know, at this kind of imaginative exercises. So they, in that sense, it's interesting, like thinking about kind of these different societies. So yeah.
Şebnem, what are you going to do with your wand?
I actually agree with Benedetta in the sense that the key is education. So for me, like public awareness, if we can find a way to increase public awareness and education, this like tech literacy, these are very important. Like because we are the lucky ones who know the problem, who define the problem, and who is actually thinking about how we can solve this. But there are millions of people out there even have no idea how data is used, how data affects their lives, and how it will have major impact on their lives, because it also has life-changing implications. So I think the public awareness, education would be my want in the end to have some change in the future as well.
Wonderful. So please join me in thanking the panelists today. And we're finishing, so if you want to make it to another session, it's 2:00, and so there is one last talk in the other sessions. Otherwise, you can let your brain relax for a bit. And we have our next session beginning at 3:15. 3:15. Thank you, Marcus. Okay, so enjoy your break.